First of all, it's Eilfie music, everybody. So you're back in State College. I've missed you.
Aw.
I have. I mean, every once in a while I see you, you bake amazing bread.
Thank you.
She comes out and she gives me bread. It's really awesome bread. Actually, Eilfie is an amazing cook. And clearly quite humble about it.
I get it from my dad, as apparently many other things, but yeah.
Well, let's talk about your dad a little bit, if it's not a sore topic at this point, because I don't think a lot of people really got a chance through any stuff. People who've watched Paranormal State know that your dad was neat and kind of a rock star, but I don't think they really got like what your dad did, or certainly anything about. Well, tell me about your dad.
Oh God. Well.
Let's start with the thing that I know you have in common that you can talk about. I've seen his paintings.
Yes. My dad was a painter and a sculptor, but he primarily did oil paintings, and we still have quite a bit of those. And similar to me, he incorporated a lot of his magical works in his art paintings, as you have seen. And
absolutely. A number of the ones of his that I saw that you guys had up at the Paranormal State offices, some of them looked like representations of visionary journeys. And then a few looked like magical workings on their own right. There were a couple that had sigils on them, and then one that was powerfully like a gateway into this other visionary place. And so talk a little bit about the magic that he did and how that intersected with his art.
Well, it was interesting. It actually is a combination of that, because a lot of his paintings were either places that he had been to, since he grew up in California. A lot of his time was spent in the desert, in the mountains, and leaping around like a goat. And and then there were other paintings that seemed to be more visionary, maybe almost like past life memories, or just things he could see and just painted. I mean, similar to what Chris thinks I do. And then some of them were literally sigils that he made into very large images and put on the wall in powder. And he never really said, like, this is a sigil and it will do this. It's like he would paint it, put it on a wall, and then see. He kind of like
see who would do anything with it. Like,
he kind of like experimenting and see like how people would react to it.
But that makes a lot of sense, though. Like if you front load someone and you say this thing is supposed to do these things, then you've got that portion of the population who goes and looks at it and says, yes, it does this thing. Do I get a cookie? I feel special. And then you've got that portion that is like, it totally doesn't do that thing you told me that it does. And then you've got a few people who have genuine experiences with it. But so I totally understand how functional it is, because it also is verification for you as the person who's trying to put it out there, who's trying to create that magic.
Oh yeah, he definitely was of the mindset of not front-loading people. He had students, he had people he taught, and a lot of times he wanted, like, please explain to me everything, please just kind of pour into my brain. And most of the time he would be handing them books, go, here, read this. And they would walk away frustrated most of the time.
I understand that frustration, because many of my own students lob it at me fairly frequently, and people especially who are either in House Khepri or who are kind of interested in the Khepri and stuff, because it's one of the hard things about being someone who keeps a tradition that is mystical and visionary or revelatory. The one thing you learn real quick is, even if you're a teacher, you're not really teaching so much as you're throwing little guide stones to people. And if you just reach in to their head and go and like fix it, even if like you're grabbing onto the front of their cranium and dragging them along, that's accomplishing nothing for them. I mean, it might make you feel good and powerful, but unless the student can get there on their own, it's a completely invalid lesson.
Yeah, and his practice was very much of the mindset, yes, there's a student and there's a teacher, but this teacher does not literally lead the student by the hand. It is more like, here's a whole bunch of books, read them, and then come back to me when you have questions.
Speaking of students and questions and things, so you were a student of your father's stuff.
I was a student of his more officially, unofficially, for a much short amount of time. I mean, he waited until I was much older before he started teaching me on a more practical basis, because he didn't want to, he wanted me to consciously, like, here, do you want to actually learn this? It wasn't like, hey, since I learned this, you have to learn it too.
That is a respectable standpoint, though,
Yeah.
because there's too many parents who kind of assume that their kids are going to have to be like little extensions of themselves.
Yeah, and the thing is, I learned things kind of backwards, because I would sit in and listen to him teach. So I learned the philosophies and the ideas, but I didn't learn necessarily the mechanics
Okay.
until much later.
So you grew up immersed in all of this stuff, and it's, as somebody who lives in a magical household, I'm trying to imagine like your father and your mother's perspective, where there's certain things that just seem perfectly normal to you when you are part of a magical tradition, and you don't even think to explain it. And so you're there being, just soaking all of that up. But it took a while to maybe contextualize some of the like, you got to see like end results, but not always how people got there.
Yeah, it became quite frustrating, especially when leaving that and going into the larger world and interacting with people and going, what, this is not normal?
Yeah. Well, and the language
Yes.
can be complicated. I mean, well, your own art is interesting, and I think that I would side with Chris that some of it is definitely stuff that's coming forth, if not directly from vision, certainly from past selves or past ties that you have. All the stuff that I've seen of yours, it's up on Hecata's Crossroads. When you're doing your art, are you consciously doing magic, or do you pick and choose certain things to be magical, or at what point do these things just naturally collide?
Some paintings I've made, I think I consciously tried to like put power into make it into something, especially if I'm sculpting or creating something. But other paintings, I've noticed that I didn't consciously do it, but the end result is like, okay, so apparently it turned into this. Didn't expect that. Sure, we'll go with it.
How much of your father's tradition were you able to take away? Or do you continue it even though he's passed away?
I do continue it. Luckily, I know one of his students, Tony, who helps me along and still continues the idea of like teacher-student. If I have questions, I go bug him. But it's definitely, it was a little difficult after he passed to continue it, because it was one of those stopping moments of, even though I felt like, okay, I have to carry on with the tradition and everything, but at the same time, the motivation wasn't quite there, because, I don't know, it was the blockage of the lost that I didn't feel the oomph behind it, and now it's starting to come back.
It strikes me as just an incredibly weighty responsibility, to be the inheritor of a tradition, and at this point to be like the sole inheritor of a tradition, and a very long and storied, like a very respectable tradition. I mean, it is. What was your father's tradition?
My father practiced Thelema. He was a magician. He practiced under the stuff people more know from, like Crowley and Israel Regardie and the Argentum Astrum, and that form of more structured magic.
Which is different from the OTO.
Yes, it is.
And actually quite different from the OTO in a lot of like both political and ideological things.
Yeah, what I've noticed, the difference of it is both what their practices are, though they are very similar in their mechanics of how they structure their rituals. Why they do some rituals are different, and also I know some of them with the OTO they're more social, but with the Argentum Astrum it's more personal. And
now, because most of the people listening are not really going to know the difference or the relation to Crowley, could you explain a little bit of what the AA, the Astrum Argentium, versus the OTO in terms of the relation to Crowley, and then your father's relation to that?
The OTO is more of a fraternity of the social order, which I believe started beforehand, and then it's one of those things where it's like a branch of a branch of a branch, because you also have the Golden Dawn think before, after, never
Yeah,
from.
yeah, they're-
Yeah, Gondon, OTO, Argento, Astrum, and it's like all these branches. And you have, it was more explained to me of like, you have the outer circle and then you have the little inner circle. And people think of it as like super secret, uber thing. I'm like, well, not really.
I will be perfectly
not
honest.
really super
Back
secret.
when I was reading anything about the AA, it was like, we're not even sure that this thing exists, and it was the one true sort of thing. And then, of course, you've got the naysayers who are like, no, it never really existed. It was just something somebody made up to seem like they were more important.
Yeah.
And then finding that I know someone who's like, 1 or 2 steps removed from the founder of that, and is the most incredibly humble person I know.
It's that whole lineage thing. A lot of times it comes down to how many degrees are you separated from it in the lineage, and I am 18th generation back. Great aunt was a, I don't know, shaman of some kind. It comes back to like my Indian princess over here.
Yeah. And then the real question, of course, is it doesn't matter if you're an Indian princess back there. What are you doing here? What are you doing now? Now, I have always been curious. Did your father know Aleister Crowley?
I'm not sure if he, as far as I know, he did not know him personally.
Okay. But he was like 1 student removed or so?
As far as I know, he's possibly 2.
Okay.
Because he did know Israel Regardie.
Okay.
I actually have letters of correspondence.
Okay, well that's a
That is the coolest
that's a heck
thing
of
for
a
me.
thing to put on the resume, frankly.
But
So we're talking someone who has come from an occult tradition that is not just like, I come from a family tradition, and they're just kind of pulling that out of their bum. It's fun. Well, the thing is for me, it makes me crazy because I've run into so many people who are like, I totally come from this family tradition, and you never talk to anybody about it. You're just like, do. I really am a badass, and I don't need to tell you. Actually, I'm such a badass, I never need to say anything. Have some bread. It's tasty.
the thing was, it was never a big deal in my family. It was just like,
It just was.
he was a student, he learned things. And the thing is, that always makes me crazy about the uber secret stuff. It's like, the occult, when they say it's hidden, it's not literally hidden. Well, sometimes it's literally hidden. But the hidden part is the understanding of it. You
Yes.
can read all the books you want, and you will never understand it, or you will have the moment. And that's where the hidden part comes in.
That is perfect.